In thinking about the discussion, I thought maybe by way of setting up a little bit of context, I'd share with you a conversation I had with a group of leaders from China. We actually sponsor some work with the Chinese leadership at Cambridge University, and as part of that, myself and others from Anglo American, including our chairman, Sir John Parker, actually talked to the leaders, and the program actually links directly back to the President of China. And we were having a long discussion regarding China, its position in the world today, the challenges they're facing. And maybe if I talk to you through some of the issues, there might be some things you recognise. There are some really interesting conversations about the leaders of state-owned enterprises and the leaders of private enterprise and some of the issues they're confronting as a society, and they will be a couple of points that I pick up. And there are some interesting parallels in some of the challenges that we're seeing. And if you think that in terms of South Africa talking to a state development model, and China is going more and more towards private enterprise and moving away from its state development model because of the challenges they're facing, and a recognition that to compete on a global basis, they're going to have to rely on private enterprise and a different type of model. It's an interesting conversation, and one that we need to probably reflect on in some of the debates we have. In an economy such as China, the scale and breadth of its internal market provided a great base to work with, which is something we don't have the luxury of sharing in South Africa. That is, we don't have the same scale and scope in terms of our internal market. In China, relatively low salaries, improving productivity levels, and the propensity of the Chinese people to put money away in the form of savings have together helped create a virtuous cycle of investment in infrastructure and in their industries. And relative wage improvements from that lower base have been driven by productivity improvements, and that's also supported continuing investment. And so they've tried to set up a virtuous cycle, but underpinning development and progression has been continuing improvement in productivity. However, with industrial capacity now exceeding internal consumption, China's industries have to improve quality and reduce costs in order to compete with the best in the world to win market share for their products, because they can't only rely on the internal markets to take the products that they produce. For them, competitive growth will only come as discretionary expenditure supports increasing consumption of new products and services. While I'm going to only reflect on a limited part of a much broader conversation, I wanted to raise a point we did cover in that sweeping landscape. The issue of South Africa and its state-owned enterprises was a point of comparison. I'll talk about SOEs. SOEs play a crucial role in our economy and in South Africa, as they do in China. And to a large extent, the ability of South African industries to compete globally is influenced by the effectiveness of our SOEs. Many South African industries rely on and intersect with the services provided by SOEs at critical points in our processes, whether relating to the provision of energy, rail or port services, for example. Unless all the links in the chain develop at the same rate and in collaboration with one another, a pinch point will appear and the change will break or at least be severely constrained. And that then impacts all of us in terms of what we produce and the effectiveness of us being competitive, either as the private sector or in terms of other SOEs that also rely on that interconnectedness in terms of those industries. We can see various pinch points with SOEs here in South Africa, and no one in this room needs reminding of our current challenges. However, they are an example of the need for private enterprise and government to work together towards achieving broad-based economic prosperity. So in simple terms, for South Africa to be successful, we have to be equally efficient and successful and continue to transform the effectiveness and productivity of our state-owned enterprises along with the private sector. And at the end of the day, if we're playing by different sets of rules, or not talking or integrating our approaches, then we impact each other, and ultimately it's South Africa that is the poorer for that disconnect. So SOEs form an integral part of the backbone of our economic and industrial infrastructure. They must be prioritised for investment, and they need to be led through the lens of commercial decision-making. So as we have adopted a state development model, as China has, that assumes almost independent development of both state and privately owned enterprises, we need to create the conditions that will help them both be successful and will connect them and help them integrate so that we're successful together. For me, I'm not a politician. It is not up to me to make judgments about whether the state development model is the right model for the country. South Africa has free and fair elections, the politicians make the decisions, and all of us then work within the system. I can voice an opinion or a view, and it doesn't make my opinion or view any relevant than the person next to me. Our job, once that direction is set, is to understand how we can be constructive in our part of the world to connect to the other parts of the country, whether they be SOEs or other private enterprises or any other structure that is in place. And the point I'm making is that then government does have a responsibility to make sure that we are connecting, that the pieces do work, and that we are successful as a country in that construct. This is something China is trying to come to grips with, and it's been a really important conversation in China. Now, given more than 90% of our SOEs are losing money, we must start to reflect on why that could be so. And further, given the tough conditions our SOEs are experiencing, why would we be surprised to hear our private companies complaining that business in South Africa, it's tough. It's tough for all of us. But in private enterprise, we can't lose money because it's your money. I represent our shareholders, and in many cases for us, our shareholders are you. If you've got a pension fund, or if you invest in a company that invests in companies, there's a good chance if those investments are in South Africa, you own and you are an owner of Anglo American, and I work for you. And you charge me with the responsibility to look after your money. And that's a responsibility we take very seriously. And at the end of the day, we have to make tough decisions to ensure that we protect your money, the money of average South Africans. At the same time, we must recognise one cannot fund the other. In China, they are also confronting this dilemma. However, they have a very different model. That is, each must survive and make tough decisions required to survive in this competitive world. They're very tough on their SOEs and they're very tough on private enterprise. And we compete basically using the same rules that we have to survive. So I think it's important if we're going to be successful as a country, and we have been. So don't let me leave you thinking that I don't believe we've been successful. I think the last 20 years or 21 years has been an absolute miracle, and I am the first to stand up and say and acknowledge the great work that South Africa's done. But for us to go forward, we have to continue to evolve the debate and change the debate into one where we connect and the role of government integrates the way we work together to be successful together. We have to survive the tough times together. For South Africa to be successful, it cannot be left to one group to carry the burden and lead with competitive and efficient business practices. We must work together as partners to create a sustainable future together. As real partners, we must speak the truth and be constructive in speaking to that truth. No point criticising without coming up with something that could make a difference in bringing those pieces together.